Mr. Shafi, are you able to hear us? Apologies, everyone. We're just trying to sort out some tech issues, so just bear with us for a second.
Natalie, can you hear me, Natalie?
Yes, we can hear you, but I don't think you can hear us. We can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, you hear me, right? Can somebody speak from your side? I just want to make sure I can.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, so am I good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. So I'm going to start with a video. So probably I'm going to share my screen now. I can see my screen, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
In pursuing climate action, world leaders cannot forget young people.
And they cannot forget nature.
We are empowering young people in Qatar to mobilize for urgent action in tackling the climate and ecological crises.
We are the Arab Youth Climate Movement in Qatar. We are Qatar's first youth-led and registered grassroots organization, and we provide a platform for active youth participation in the ongoing dialogue on our ecological future.
By curating workshops, organizing public lectures, and publishing reports.
We seek to create a transformative change in the community by developing holistic environmental learning programs and engaging in community activities and supporting evidence-based policy research.
The current ecological crisis cannot be tackled alone. That's why we need your help and support. Together we can conserve our planet and protect nature by advocating for policy change for the benefit of humanity.
Stand with us.
Stand with us.
Stand with us.
Thank you all for joining me today. I just want to congratulate the team behind the Qatar Power Youth Forum, also for inviting me today to speak to you. So I just wanted a glimpse of what we do here in Qatar and how much that it means for us and that's for the region in terms of climate change advocacy and awareness. So as you may not be aware of our organization, many of they do, and those who doesn't do, I just want to make sure why we all started it. Many of you have been heard of climate change and how we can make larger changes, which is much necessary in terms of how we can do from personal and also from a larger perspective of community, and how we may push our governments to do necessary action. So there was a big question that we wanted to ask as an organization. It was, can we change? So how would we change? So you might have seen there was a large scale protest and movements of young people across the globe. I mean, that's what all were inspirations for us to start our movement. So if you ever heard, back in 2017, there was a large climate march in Washington, D.C., United States, where community came up telling that it is time that our governments and corporate companies make sure that climate change is the ultimate important task to be dealt globally. And that was spearheaded by young people. And that was a movement when young people like you and us started to march on the streets to build up their voices, which is the most important. It don't have to be always on the street, but through any channel of communication would be a key. So this youth conversation was taken further by leaders like Greta Thunberg, whom I also had the great honor to meet her and speak to her and her ambition back in 2019. And that was the weapon for me also as an individual and as our organization, which we were talking about, why climate change is important for young people in the Arab world and how we can make sure our voices are heard. So as an organization, we started to build up on this. And we realized how we can do that. So what does AYC, we realized what is to understand the problem and how we can make sure that we can work on it. So we identified the problem is that what we can do and how that can be done collectively. So here are some of the ways you can do is to learn more about climate change in your country, get together with a group to discuss climate change, like with Arab Youth Climate Movement, join them to raise awareness, volunteer to get youth concerns heard, because having young people on the agenda, top of the agenda, is something very important, because we know most of the times our leaders have been always talking, but never making sure they walk the talk. So also making sure that our leaders across the world are committed to what they are agreed as a part of mitigating climate change. So this was the goal of what Arab Youth Climate Movement wanted to do at large. And this gave us more opportunity to come up with ideas that led us to be the voice of the younger community here in Qatar and the Arab region. So the idea of Arab Youth Climate Movement came into when we really wanted to make sure that our community voices are heard. The whole mission and motto of Arab Youth Climate Movement is to make that our voices are heard and making sure that community understand and make that necessary changes required in order to bring the larger cause of change in the community at large. So Arab Youth Climate was formed as a first registered independent youth-led organization in Qatar. The fundamental idea was to focus on raising environmental awareness at the grassroots level, especially youth people and younger people who are for the future and who would be, bearing the brunt of that nature. And that understanding made us to make sure that our voices are heard on larger ecological issues, and also how young people can contribute, not only in terms of solutions, but also administration and also in terms of policy development. We made sure that this is a platform for active discussion or participation and dialogue between young people and intergenerational discussion that can be, the platform can be used for that. So the vision was ultimately clear. It is reawakening the community's awareness regarding ecological crisis, including biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, deforestation, you name it, ocean pollution. So the larger cause was to tell the younger people that, there are problems and how we can build that awareness at the larger community level. Not only, maybe it can be locally, it can be nationally, regionally, and globally. So AYCM's vision was clear. We wanted to make sure it was locally heard, and then regionally heard, and then globally heard. So our mission was to build a movement, that understand, where younger people understand how natural ecosystem works, and empowering them to get more understanding. So some of our programs are based on this understanding, which I will be coming to the discussion later on. And also advocating based on evidence-based policies. This is a critical one, because sometimes people lose traction in terms of understanding climate change and environmental issues with mere knowledge. But we made sure that we are talking with evidence-based researchers, which science have been concrete enough about in problems of climate change as larger causes. Those strategic objectives are always to develop holistic environmental education at schools and universities, and also build partnership locally and internationally. And of course, to create a shared vision of Qatar's ecological future. So we work with organizations, partner with communities, where we co-create solutions, ideas, and discuss with policymakers as well as the local change makers. So the larger causes which we work on, like climate change, loss of biodiversity, exhaustion of natural ecosystem. So the idea is to bring up the understanding at the very grassroots level from a very understandable layman languages. So sometimes people used to feel that the climate communications are a bit higher level of language where common man doesn't really understand. So we always made sure that the communications are done in a very layman language. So we work in a very simple way. We have an advisory board. We look for fundings with partners, and we have institutional partners. So this is overall logistic and how our organization works. And we are also very much working on policy researchers, which are very focused on environmental research in Qatar. In terms of community projects, if you heard of our Earth Talk series, used to be one of our key initiatives where we invite international speakers to come to Qatar, where they used to speak about from environmental activism to environmental policy making, and also, youth participants too. In the past, we hosted prolific speakers from across the globe. Until COVID came in, we moved to hosting initiative online. And we have Ambassadors of Environment program, which was to train young people like you who are getting into that activism mode. We had our first cohort of ambassadors who will be coming out very soon. And we are also announcing a new ambassadors program later in November. And I hope to see much of you joining this ambassadors program, where we train younger people to be the leaders in community here in Qatar. Another program is Eco Literacy for Imams. It's a program we work with the mosque and the masjids here, where we educate the priest who lead the prayers to understand the environmental issues both from religious and also from science perspective, and to use their platform to reach out to the community. Another program is Carbon Footprint app, which we will be releasing very soon. It's an app to measure your carbon footprint. So this app would be released very soon, and especially young people and school-going students would have the first access to this app where you can measure your own carbon footprint. So I hope you look after our social media channels when we will be releasing it very soon. And we're also coming up with VR experience, where we'll be using VR to showcase some of the environmental degradation that we may not see on a day-to-day basis live here in Qatar. So that is another thing we are working on. So these are ongoing science-based researchers, which are more technical, which is dealt with our science team. And also I had honored to, introduce my team who are working on this issue. You can see we are looking for more and more young people to join our team, of course, who are very enthusiastic, who have time to dedicate and bring up their passion about environment and climate. And also we are blessed with having an international scientific advisory committee who also supports us from science-based understanding of climate change and also governance of our organization. So what does this all things give to you is that the understanding that young people can lead. And Arab Youth Climate Movement was one of the organizations that spearheaded the climate movement in the Middle East. So starting its roots here in Qatar, we have been greatest honored to represent the Arab region, and not only in terms of no representative role, but also doing concrete work on ground. This showcases that there was a lack of youth voices, especially from the Arab world. So that void or that vacuum was what pushed for Arab Youth Climate Movement to be a big force of change in the region. Again, we have more programs on the pipeline coming up, and we believe, sometimes people used to complain in the past, and myself when I came here in Qatar, we used to complain like we don't have a platform where we can join to do something beyond, a community initiative, how I can support my voices, how can I heard locally and internationally. So we made sure that platform is legit, and that is an organization that is appreciated, that has been acclaimed locally and regionally and globally, where you can use this as a platform for your work, both in advocacy, policy, and also in research. So Arab Youth Climate Movement sets an example how young people can come up with solutions. Leading environmental movement is not a thing of global north, because most of the time we get inspired by seeing many of the stories from the global north. Of course, we should, but sometimes we need to have some of them in our own backyard, because back then we realized that we lost an opportunity because we always aspire to be looking into global north without realizing what we as a global south, especially from our West Asia, has its own potential. So it's always you need to understand that activism is a global phenomena, and young people from across the globe has their own say. And it is true for young people from the Arab region like you and us who live and belong to this region now, has to make sure that your voices are also heard at local and larger global level. So what we invite is to all of to join us, because it is necessary that one voice doesn't make the huge bang. We want more and more people joining, because it's a larger cause beyond Qatar, beyond region. It's a global issue, and countries across the globe needed support to come up with solutions, come up with ideas, come up with the policies that can transform how we communicate climate change. We already know the solutions. That's why I didn't jump into what is climate change and what we can do. It's there. It is proven. Science has already showcased that. So I didn't want to jump. I wanted to show what young people how can they voice, how can they bring up an organization to a level where that can be that can be existing one. If at all what you can do is to volunteer with those organizations to support. So the example I gave is to you about Arab Youth Climate Movement today was because we didn't have much of the organization in the Arab region as such, leading climate conversation. It is also important that you maintain your integrity and transparency and also build larger course of understanding of climate change and how the regional perspectives also has to be shared. Because sometimes if you share about climate change, much of the time the conversation stays around, polar bear dying in Antarctica, or forest fires in Amazon. And we forget our region, The climate change is not something prone to Amazon or Antarctica. It's a global phenomenon. Every country, every region, every city feels the brunt of it. But sometimes the conversation goes in the wrong direction. And we always see the shared pictures of a panda dying in Antarctica as a weak link to climate change, to be frank. So that is very critical. That's why climate communication is critical and crucial. And that is why young people who are well-educated, who understand science like no other people in the globe, come up with, their own perspective using the science background to share that. So today, my idea of sharing Arab Youth Climate Movement experience is that there are organizations that you can volunteer, join, and make your voices heard. Sometimes you may not be heard because maybe you are singled out. So that's why we built the platform. So when you're coming into a platform, it is quite important that the platform is transparent and legit, and that represent the youth voices. So I welcome all of those who are here today that be part of us, join us, write to us. If you have potential projects that you think is critical for you at your perspective, we're also happy to accommodate those. And I look for more people to join our initiative and make that sure that our voices are heard. So I'm going to stop here. If you have any queries or something, some questions, I am happy to ask you guys. So thank you very much once again for having me here. It is an honor to talk to you all, and absolutely I want to thank the team who have organized this Qatar Youth Power Summit. And also I wanted to let you know that we will be hosting the first Youth Climate Arab Summit in November. So I'm looking forward to you all guys to join there too. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr. Shafi. So we still have a few moments to entertain some questions. Is that okay with you?
No worries. Go ahead.
Okay, so during your session, one of our participants, Tikang, asked a question, and their question reads as this: we are within the spheres of rapid globalization, the fourth industrial revolution, and technological speeds. What role can artificial intelligence play in climate redemption?
Well, if you know that in terms of climate change issues, technology plays a key area or key role in how we can mitigate climate impacts. So, of course, anything to do with technology is always forefront. For example, if I will come to AI, but I'll make a simple example like carbon capture technology, which Qatar and other countries uses to reduce their CO2 emissions from oil and gas fields, are an example of how you can use this technology to reduce your carbon emissions. So AI can be used in the future or in the coming days to predict how much of carbon would be emitted from a system, and you get to understand in advance what's going to happen, and you can create a loop where those carbon dioxides are not going back to the atmosphere but internally used for system and stays in the system. So artificial intelligence, and in case any technology, have highest potential in the days to come to how we can use these technologies to mitigate the impacts of climate change, both not only mitigating, but also to predict the upcoming days. The impacts of climate change will be more and more visible. So how you interpret, maybe a shock, a tsunami can come because of some issues, or maybe you can have some unprecedented flooding in some of the countries. We can use artificial intelligence to predict those changes. That they are a quick one because countries cannot cope up with those changes. That's why we say extreme weather events cause catastrophic impacts to country and the economy and the people. So I think artificial intelligence can be a great tool to get things understand in the faster phase or in advance.
Thank you so much, participant. I hope that answers your question. Another question that is very popular in the chat, and I'll just kind of put them together for you. And that question is, do you think that the effects of climate change is reversible at this point? Are we able to go back to pre-climate change periods, or is it something that we need to adapt to now and try to prevent it from becoming worse?
Well, very good question. I mean, given the fact, all understand that there is no point of reversal now. Now is that how we can stop it? So given the fact, that the agreement which all countries have signed, what we popularly known as Paris Agreement, which most 190 countries have signed as a signatory nations, including Qatar, is that they will mitigate, or they will try to make sure that the global temperature rise stay within 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. What does this mean? That doesn't mean that we are not going back. We're making sure that doesn't go front. So the idea is to hold that temperature within the next decade, so we don't have more impact of climate change in the coming days. So it is absolute necessity that we understand that at this point, we are looking into something called climate adaptation, and how our system and society and community can have technology and information so we can absolutely adapt to the current system.
Thank you so much for your response. I see one of our participants, Aima, has her hand up. Would you like to unmute yourselves and ask your question?
First of all, I want to thank you for today's lecture. And my name is Ayman Batul. I have a question. I just don't understand it. What is carbon footprint?
Simple. The carbon footprint is nothing but the amount of carbon associated with the things you do. So the measuring of that is called carbon footprint. Example, I as Neeshad consume 5 liters of petrol to go to my work. The CO2 associated emission out of that is my carbon footprint. So like I mentioned, one of our app is coming out, which will be distributed, people are coming to all the schools in the beginning in Qatar with the help of offices of UNESCO and Ministry of Education. The idea is it's a sort of an app where you have a survey where you will input your data, like how much electricity was consumed, how much water was consumed, did you take an international travel using a flight, what did you consume, like it's meat or veg or vegan, and how much waste generated. That will give the footprint of an individual. So footprint is nothing but the CO2 emissions related to the things you consume, use on a day-to-day basis. And of course, CO2 is the global warming causing agent, so it has a crucial part, and how much every individual or organization or corporate companies emission has a great role to play in the climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Neeshad, for answering that. I hope that answered your question, Aima. I see that Ibrahim Haider, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. I need to know your opinion about geoengineering and its potential in saving our environment.
Well, Ibrahim, good question. Like I mentioned, technology has been one of the forefront discussed idea how to mitigate climate change. So geoengineering has been highly regarded, one of the technologies that can be used, and the studies are still working on how to make sure it is well adapted. It doesn't have any other impact associated with geoengineering. Sometimes people fear some types of technologies are also having some negative impact on the environment. But geoengineering has been highly regarded as one of the technologies that can be used and to mitigate climate change. I'm finding some questions in the chat by Kushi. So is there a certain way to measure carbon footprint? Can I answer this?
Of course.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So basically, measuring the carbon footprint is sort of mathematical formulae. So it's not every individual's task. So we as AYCM, there are a lot of calculators available online. So you can just input your data so you can get your individual carbon footprint. What AYCM did different was we made sure that, so when you do this mathematical modeling for carbon footprint calculation, you need to consider a lot of factors around the carbon factor, the values, how much is the emission that is coming out of Qatar, etc. So when you do with any global app available online, they are like globalized value. That means they are streamlined so that almost all the countries have a similar system. What we did with our app, which is coming out soon, is to make sure that these values are super accurate to Qatar standard. So the value you get, like, hey, I have 1.5 tons of carbon footprint for last month. I mean, that is like super close to realistic value. I mean, that is the amount of carbon CO2 emission I do personally come out. So, that's why I say our app is super accurate in a great sense. So that's the way how we do the measuring. So it's more like a mathematical equations and formulas. So Viplav, even if it's little CO2, it comes from, I don't know, there are some questions around wow, there's too many questions. Is carbon neutral future feasible? Do you think that, can somebody take the question? I saw one question around plastic. I would love to take that question again.
Yeah, so there was a question regarding plastic issues in the environment and how we can stop it from Shahid Mohammed.
Thank you, Shahid. I mean, of course, there are a lot of ways to stop it before it comes to, our environment and causing chaos to our oceans and also land and to animals on both land and on the sea. The fact you should understand is that plastic is a byproduct from oil and gas industry. This is the fact, and you have to understand this is a byproduct of the same oil and gas who have to reduce their emissions in the coming days and ages. So the plastic issues can be solved if those oil and gas companies, especially the oil companies, make sure that they reduce their production. So ultimately, plastic will be reduced, because if there is no oil, there is no byproduct, there is no plastic. And I hope also the way our system works, that we find there are alternatives available, like how we subsidize oil. I feel like it's time to subsidize alternative way of producing the packages, the things we are associated with plastic, like things we get from the bakalas and from the malls, etc. That can be replaced with the paper-based or something which are recycled or reused. So in a way, the plastic pollution can be reduced from the source. So it is important that if you want to get out of the menace of plastic, you need to stop it from the source, not going to the beach. Of course, to clean the beaches, we have to do it. But first and foremost, is to stop it from the source. If that is not coming, the beach cleanups make sense. If not, another 200 years, you will be still cleaning the beach.
Thank you, Mr. Shafi. Unfortunately, participants, we've run out of time. I want to thank Mr. Shafi for leading this eye-opening discussion. And I know that many of us have a passion for activism, and I hope we take this knowledge and the resources and contacts that Mr. Shafi has provided us to empower us. Shantong and I will now be handing over to Anya and Sebastian. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope and wish you good luck. And to all the participants, stay inspired, stay passionate. It's your age, you have to make sure you are heard at the highest level.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ziang Song and Kiana. Our next speaker is Ms. Laila Ibrahim Bacha, who has more than 10 years of experience in curating and managing cultural events and projects. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Bacha as she delivers her session titled How to Look at Public Art.
Hello all. Thank you for having